The morning I realized my jewelry was gone, the house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. My bedroom smelled faintly of lavender sachets and old paper, but the air had a sharp edge to it, the kind you feel before you know why. I stood in front of my dresser with the top drawer open, staring at an empty velvet tray as if my eyes could summon gold back into existence. I'm 68 now, and I've learned that shock doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a woman in a soft robe, barefoot on cold hardwood, counting empty spaces with a steady finger. My wedding band was still on my hand, warm from my skin. But the pearl necklace Harold gave me on our 20th anniversary, the one he saved for by taking extra shifts at the plant, was gone. The small sapphire earrings my mother wore to church every Sunday, gone. Even the thin charm bracelet with the tiny silver heart, dented from years of dishwater and life, was missing. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the refrigerator hum down the hallway. The clock in the kitchen clicked the seconds forward, indifferent and faithful. I kept thinking, maybe I put them somewhere safe. Maybe I'm forgetting. Grief does that, people say. It loosens your grip on details. But I wasn't confused. After Harold died, I started keeping my life smaller and neater, like a garden you tend, because it's one of the last things that still listens to you. I clipped coupons on Sundays, paid my utilities online when the website cooperated, and kept a folder in the kitchen drawer labeled Bills in thick black marker. Social Security came in on the 3rd of every month. My pension check from Harold's union came 2 days later. I knew what I had, and I knew what I didn't. I also knew what it meant to stretch love until it thinned. My daughter, Linda, used to call me every day when she was young, back when long distance cost money and people still wrote notes on paper. These days, she called when she needed something, not because she was cruel, not even because she was thoughtless on purpose. She just moved through the world like it owed her softness, and she was always surprised when it didn't. "Mom, can I stop by?" she'd say, voice bright, as if stopping by was a gift she was giving me. "I'm in the area." She was never just in the area. Linda and her husband, Mark, lived 20 minutes away in a townhouse with white trim and a Live, Laugh, Love sign in the entryway. They had 2 kids, busy schedules, and a way of talking about money that made it sound like a storm that kept finding them no matter where they stood. I'd helped when I could, a little toward the electric bill when Mark's hours got cut, groceries when the kids had a growth spurt and ate like locusts, the occasional "I'll pay you back" that floated between us and never landed. Harold would have told me to stop. He would have said, "Evelyn, you can love them without letting them drain you dry." But Harold wasn't here anymore, and sometimes when a house goes quiet after a long marriage, you start mistaking being needed for being loved. I stood up and checked the closet. I checked the small fireproof lockbox in the back corner, where I kept my birth certificate and Harold's death certificate. I checked the little tin in the pantry where I hide cash for emergencies, the kind my mother taught me to keep. Everything else was where it should be, only the jewelry was gone. My hands shook a little as I opened my phone and scrolled through my recent calls, not because I expected to find a thief's name there, but because I needed something concrete. My screen showed Linda's number 3 times this week. The last call was yesterday afternoon. Yesterday, Linda had come over with the kids while I was making chicken soup. The weather had turned early, gray clouds pushing low over the neighborhood, and I remembered feeling grateful for the noise of little feet. The kids had raced to the living room, leaving their backpacks by the front door. Linda stood in my kitchen, tapping her nails on the counter. "You look tired, Mom," she said, glancing around like she was taking inventory. "Are you sleeping okay?" "I sleep," I told her. "It's just the weather." She watched me ladle soup into bowls and said casually, "You still have all that jewelry, right?" I looked at her then, the way you look at a question you don't understand yet. What do you mean? Oh, nothing, she said quickly, laughing a little. I just, you know, you should be careful. People target older ladies. I remember smiling, because mothers do that when their daughters show concern, even if it comes wrapped in strange packaging. I remember wiping my hands on a dish towel and telling her I'd be fine. I remember her offering to take the trash out, which she never did. She disappeared down the hallway for longer than it should have taken. At the time, I told myself she was checking on the kids. Now, sitting in the quiet after the soup was long gone and the bowls were washed and stacked, that memory hardened into something else. I called her. It rang 3 times before she answered, breathy, like she'd been moving fast. Hi, Mom. Linda, I said, and my voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. Did you take my jewelry? There was a pause, and in that pause, I heard everything she didn't say. Then she let out a small sigh, as if I'd accused her of borrowing a cardigan without asking. Mom, don't freak out. My stomach dropped, not because of the words, but because of the tone. The same tone she used when she was 16 and I found cigarettes in her purse. Linda, I repeated, softer this time. Where is it? It's not gone. Gone, she said quickly. I just borrowed it. Borrowed, like it was a mixing bowl, like it was a book from a shelf. For what? I asked, and my fingers tightened around the phone until my knuckles ached. There was rustling on her end, like she was covering the receiver or turning away from someone. Then she came back, voice lowered, almost annoyed. We needed money, okay? Mark's been stressed and we haven't had a real break in forever. The kids have been begging. We found this deal for a vacation package, and if we didn't jump on it, we'd lose it. I stared at my kitchen table. At the faded placemat Harold bought at a yard sale because he said it made the table look cheerful. My throat felt tight, as if I'd swallowed a hard pill. You took my wedding pearls, I said. You took my mother's earrings. It's temporary, she insisted. I swear, we'll get it back. I already planned it out. Planned it out. Another soft phrase. Meant to smooth over something sharp. Where did you take it? I asked. Mom, she said, and I could hear her impatience bloom. It's safe. Don't make this a big thing. You're not even wearing it. That was the moment something changed inside me. Quiet but permanent. Not anger like fire. Something colder. Something clear. I thought about all the things I'd worn and not worn, all the sacrifices that didn't sparkle on a neck or catch the light at a dinner table. I thought about the way Linda looked down my hallway yesterday, like she owned the place. I thought about how easy it had been for her to open a drawer in my bedroom, take what mattered to Mato, and walk back into my kitchen smiling. I need you to tell me, I said, each word measured like I was counting money. The name of the place, the address, any paperwork, receipts, anything. There was another pause. Then Linda tried to laugh, but it sounded thin. Why? Are you going to call the police on your own daughter? The word police hung there, heavy and bright, like a warning sign. I didn't answer the way she expected. I looked around my small kitchen, the calendar with Harold's handwriting still on last year's page, the stack of envelopes on the counter, the little jar of pens that always seemed to vanish when I needed one. I felt my grief, familiar as an old coat, but beneath it, I felt something else too. Self-respect. The kind that returns when you finally stop explaining away your own pain. Linda, I said quietly, I'm going to fix this, and I'm going to do it the right way. She scoffed like I was being dramatic. You're overreacting. Maybe, years ago, I would have believed her. I would have apologized for my feelings and tried to make the world softer for her again. But that morning, with my drawer empty and my heart strangely calm, I realized something I wish I'd learned earlier. People will call you dramatic when you finally refuse to be convenient. Text me the details, I said. Now. She started to argue, but I ended the call first, my thumb firm on the screen. Then I opened my kitchen drawer, pulled out my bills folder, and slid it onto the table like it was a weapon made of paper. I found my bank statements, my insurance documents, and the little notebook where I wrote down every time I'd helped Linda, every loan she called a favor, every promise that never came back. Outside, a car door slammed. Somewhere a dog barked once and stopped. I sat down, took a slow breath, and began to write, because if my daughter thought my life was something she could take from without consequence, she was about to learn that an old woman with nothing left to lose can become very careful, very quiet, and very hard to fool. By noon, the sun had climbed high enough to show the dust on my windows, the kind you stop noticing when you live alone too long. I brewed a second cup of coffee and didn't drink it. My hands were steady now, which surprised me more than the theft itself. Shock had passed. What remained was a calm that felt unfamiliar, like finding a hidden room in a house you thought you knew. Linda didn't text me right away. That wasn't new. She had a habit of letting time soften things, trusting that my worry would grow tired before her conscience did. I let my phone rest face up on the table and focused instead on the folder in front of me. Inside were years of quiet proof, bank transfers with notes that said, rent help, and kids' shoes, canceled checks with her handwriting on the back, printed emails where she thanked me and promised to pay me back next month. I'd kept them without knowing why, other than a lifelong belief that paper remembers when people don't. When Harold was alive, he handled the big conversations. I handled the details. After he died, the details were all I had left, and they became my way of staying upright. I paid bills early. I read contracts slowly. I asked questions at the bank until the young man behind the counter stopped smiling and started listening. I thought of Harold then, the way he used to straighten stacks of paper on the table before saying anything important. I could almost hear him clearing his throat. That memory didn't make me sad this time. It made me focused. At 1:30, Linda finally texted. A photo of a receipt, slightly blurry, like she'd taken it in a hurry. A pawn shop logo sat at the top, cheerful and bold. Below it was a list of items, each line shorter than the memories attached to it. Pearls, earrings, bracelet. A lump formed in my throat, but I swallowed it down and read every word twice. The address was printed at the bottom. So was the date. Yesterday's date. Borrowed, she'd said. Temporary. I drove myself to the pawn shop instead of calling her back. The car felt different under my hands, like it was carrying me somewhere I'd been avoiding for years. The radio played softly, a song from the 70s that made me think of road trips and gas station coffee. I turned it off. I wanted silence. The pawn shop sat between a nail salon and a discount mattress store. Its windows were barred, but the inside was bright, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A young woman stood behind the counter, chewing gum and scrolling on her phone. When she looked up, her expression shifted to polite boredom. "I'm looking for items pawned yesterday," I said. My voice sounded older in my ears, but not weak. "Jewelry." She asked for the receipt, and I slid Linda's photo across the counter. The girl studied it, then glanced at me, her eyes flicking briefly to my hands, my coat, my sensible shoes. "Are you the owner?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "They were taken without my permission." That made her pause. She disappeared into the back, and I stood there listening to the hum of machines and the distant clink of metal. A man came out instead, older than the girl, with tired eyes and a practiced smile. He explained policies in a careful voice. Holding periods, redemption deadlines, identification requirements. I listened, I nodded. I asked for copies. I'll need your name, he said, pen hovering. Evelyn Parker, I told him, spelling it slowly. The name felt solid in my mouth. Back in the car, I sat for a moment with the engine off, the receipt copies warm in my lap. I thought about Linda on a beach somewhere, maybe posting smiling photos online, the sun bouncing off borrowed happiness. I imagined my pearls locked in a drawer behind thick glass, reduced to inventory. That hurt. But it also clarified things. At home, I logged into my bank account and printed statements going back 3 years. I highlighted transfers. I made notes in the margins, not angry ones, just factual. I opened a new folder and labeled it neatly. I called my attorney's office, the same man who handled Harold's estate, and left a message asking for an appointment. That evening, Linda called again, her tone lighter, as if enough time had passed for everything to reset. "So," she said, "are you calmer now?" I looked at the folders lined up on my table, the copies from the pawn shop, the blinking cursor on my laptop, waiting for one more email to be sent. "I'm very calm," I said. And for the first time in a long while, it was completely true. The night after I spoke to the pawnshop manager, sleep came in pieces. I would drift off and wake again, not from panic, but from memory, the soft clink of pearls against glass. My mother fastening my earrings before church, her fingers cool and careful. Harold standing behind me at the bedroom mirror, teasing that I didn't need jewelry to be beautiful, then smiling because he knew I loved it anyway. By morning, the sadness had settled into something heavier. Not grief, exactly. Recognition. I had spent years believing that being patient was the same as being kind. I dressed slowly, choosing my blue cardigan and the shoes with the low heel that never betrayed me. The day felt important, though nothing dramatic was scheduled. Outside, the mail truck stopped with its familiar hiss, and I watched the envelopes slide into my box like small, sealed judgments. Electric bill, pharmacy receipt, a flyer for discounted cruises that made me laugh softly at the irony. I made oatmeal and ate it standing at the counter. Then I sat with my laptop and opened Linda's social media page, something I usually avoided because it left me feeling oddly lonely. There she was, smiling wide beneath a straw hat, ocean behind her, Mark beside her, arm draped casually, the kids mid-laugh. The caption read, "Much-needed family reset." I studied the photo longer than I should have. I noticed the details Linda never thought about. The hotel wristbands, the angle that cut out the crowded beach behind them, the careful way she held her hands, wrists bare. Borrowed, she'd said. I didn't comment. I didn't call. Instead, I took screenshots, dates, captions, times posted. I saved them in a folder on my computer, the same way I saved everything else, quietly. Around 10, I drove to the attorney's office. It was in a low brick building with a flag out front and parking spots labeled with white paint that had faded to ghosts. Inside, the air smelled like paper and old coffee. Mr. Collins greeted me with a gentle surprise, the way people do when they don't expect widows to need things anymore. He listened without interrupting. That mattered to me. I laid the copies from the pawn shop on his desk, then the bank statements, then the screenshots. He didn't rush me. He didn't soften the truth. "What your daughter did was not borrowing," he said carefully. "And the fact that she admitted it in text and over the phone helps you." I nodded. Hearing it said out loud made my chest tighten, but it also steadied me. He explained options, civil routes, documentation, recovery, boundaries that could be set legally, not emotionally. I asked questions, not because I doubted him, but because I needed to understand every corner of the room I was standing in. When I left his office, the sun was high and bright. I sat in my car with the window down and let the warm air touch my face. For a moment, I felt very old. Then I felt strangely young, like someone who had just learned a new language and wanted to practice it immediately. Linda called that afternoon. Her voice had changed. It carried irritation now, sharpened by the sense that she was losing control of the story. "Why did you go to the pawn shop?" she asked. No greeting, no pretense. "I needed information," I said. "You embarrassed me," she snapped. "They called. They said the original owner came in asking questions." I pictured the manager's tired eyes, his careful words. I doubted embarrassment was high on his list of concerns. "You embarrassed yourself," I said gently, "by taking something that wasn't yours." She went quiet, then her voice cracked, just a little. "I knew you'd make this ugly." That sentence landed hard, ugly, as if the problem was my refusal to look away. "I'm making it honest," I said. "There's a difference." She began listing reasons the way she always did when cornered. Stress, inflation, the kids, how hard it was to keep up, how everyone else got help from their parents. I listened, leaning against the counter, watching the late afternoon light stretch across the floor. "Have you ever realized too late that you were being used?" I thought of all the times I'd nodded through speeches like this, absorbing responsibility that didn't belong to me. This time, I didn't interrupt, but I didn't agree either. When she finally stopped, waiting for my familiar sigh, I said, "I'm working with an attorney now." The silence on the line was immediate and total. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, edged with panic. "You wouldn't," she said. "Not against your own daughter." "I wouldn't have thought you'd do this either," I replied. She hung up. That evening, I organized my files until everything had a place. I labeled folders, I backed up documents onto a flash drive, and tucked it into the lockbox. I wrote down dates and times of calls while they were still fresh. Not out of spite, out of respect for the truth. Before bed, I stood in front of my dresser again and closed the empty drawer. I didn't leave it open this time. I placed my wedding band on the nightstand and turned off the lamp. In the dark, I felt the weight of what was coming. Consequences don't announce themselves loudly. They arrive like weather, slow and inevitable, and for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of the storm. The next week moved with a strange rhythm, steady on the surface and turbulent underneath. Every morning, I woke at the same hour, brewed my coffee the same way, and fed the birds on the back porch with crumbs I saved from toast. From the outside, nothing about my life looked different. Inside, I was learning how to stand still without folding. Linda didn't call. Instead, messages came from Mark. Short at first, then longer, carefully worded as if he'd practiced them. He wrote about misunderstandings, about how Linda was emotional, about how families hurt each other without meaning to. I read each message once and saved it. I didn't reply. Silence, I was learning, can be a form of clarity. Midweek, I received an email from the pawn shop. The manager explained the holding period again, attached scanned documents, and reminded me of the deadline for reclaiming the items. I printed everything and added it to my growing stack. Paper felt reassuring in my hands. Digital things could disappear. Paper stayed where you put it. I thought about the day Harold and I bought that pearl necklace. We'd gone to a small jewelry store downtown, the kind with carpeted floors and a bell on the door. Harold was nervous, pretending not to be. He asked the clerk too many questions and nodded at every answer. When he finally handed me the little box, his hands shook. That memory felt sharper now, like it had been polished by pain. On Thursday, I went to the bank. The building had been renovated recently, all glass and clean lines, but the tellers still wore the same careful expressions. I asked to speak with a manager, and was led to a small office with framed certificates on the wall. A woman named Karen listened as I explained, her pen moving steadily across a yellow pad. She asked for statements. I had them ready. She asked about authorization. I told her there was none. She asked if I wanted to file a formal report. Yes, I said, and the word felt heavier than I expected. She explained the process, the protections available to seniors, the way patterns mattered more than single events. I recognized myself in her questions, not as a victim, but as a person whose trust had been slowly misused. That distinction mattered. When I left the bank, my phone buzzed. Linda had posted again. Another photo. Cocktails this time, condensation sliding down the glass. I didn't open the comments. I only noted the time. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the window cracked open, listening to the backdent sound of traffic and someone's television murmuring through the walls. I wrote in my notebook, not plans, just observations, dates, words that were said, words that weren't. I realized then how often I'd softened my own memory for the sake of peace. The next morning, a letter arrived from my attorney's office outlining next steps. Clear language, no drama. I read it twice, folded it carefully, and placed it in the front of my folder. The weight of the paper felt like something earned. Linda called that afternoon. Her voice was calmer, rehearsed. "Mom, we can fix this," she said. "Mark's talking to someone. We can pay you back. You don't need to involve outsiders." I pictured her pacing her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, the world rearranging itself around her discomfort. "I've already involved the right people," I said. "And I'm not discussing this over the phone anymore." She exhaled sharply. "So that's it? You're choosing paperwork over family?" I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. The word family had been used like a shield for too long. "I'm choosing honesty," I replied. "And boundaries." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You always think you're so reasonable." "I am," I said. "That's why I'm doing this." After the call, my hands trembled for the first time in days. I let them. Strength, I was learning, doesn't mean you don't feel the shake. It means you don't let it decide for you. That evening, I sorted through old photographs, not out of nostalgia, but necessity. I found images of jewelry on my neck at weddings, holidays, graduations. Accidental evidence. I placed them in an envelope labeled with the date and slid it into the folder. The house felt different now. Not emptier, clearer. Before bed, I stood by the window and watched the porch light click on across the street. Somewhere, a door closed softly. Life went on, unbothered by my private reckoning. I turned off the lights and lay down, aware that the hardest part wasn't reclaiming what was taken. It was accepting that love, without limits, can quietly turn into permission. The day the certified letter arrived, I knew before I opened it that something had shifted. The envelope was heavier than regular mail, stiff with intent. I held it in my hands for a long moment, feeling the texture of the paper, the faint warmth from sitting in the mailbox under the sun. Then I opened it carefully, the way you do when you already expect the truth to be sharp. It was from Linda. The letter was formal in a way she had never been with me. Words like misunderstanding, temporary financial hardship, and no malicious intent filled the page. She wrote about her love for me, about how shocked she was that things had escalated. At the end, she asked politely, officially, that I stop contacting third parties and allow them time to resolve the situation privately. I read it twice, then I folded it and placed it in my folder without responding. That afternoon, I drove to the pawn shop again, this time with my attorney's letter in hand. The manager recognized me immediately. He nodded, businesslike, and led me to the counter. The jewelry was brought out one piece at a time, each item laid gently on a black cloth. Seeing them like that, stripped of story, reduced to objects, hurt more than I expected. I didn't touch them yet. I just looked. The pearls were still luminous, indifferent to everything they'd been dragged through. The sapphire earrings caught the fluorescent light, stubbornly beautiful. I signed the paperwork, my name steady on the line. The manager explained the fees, the timeline, the procedure. Everything was done by the book. That mattered. When I finally closed my fingers around the jewelry case, something loosened in my chest. Not relief, recognition. These things had survived more than one chapter of my life. So had I. Outside, I sat in my car and rested the case on the passenger seat like a quiet companion. I didn't cry, I just breathed. At home, I placed each piece back in the drawer, not arranging them the way I used to. This time, I left space between them. Space felt important now. Later that evening, Mark came by, unannounced. I saw his car through the front window and felt my shoulders tighten before I even stood up. I didn't rush. I finished rinsing my mug, dried my hands, and opened the door. He stood there holding his phone, jaw set, eyes darting past me into the house as if checking what else he might be losing. "Evelyn," he said, trying for warmth. "We need to talk." "We can talk here," I replied, staying in the doorway. He sighed and launched into explanations. How he hadn't known, how Linda had meant well, how things had gotten out of hand. He spoke the way people do when they're trying to rewind time without admitting they pressed play. I listened. When he finished, I said, "I've documented everything." That stopped him. "I'm not interested in arguments," I continued, "or promises. I'm interested in accountability." He frowned. "You're really going through with this?" "Yes." His voice hardened. "You know this could affect your relationship with your grandchildren." That was the first time I felt anger rise. Quick and hot. I kept my voice calm anyway. "If my relationship with them depends on my silence," I said, "then it isn't healthy for any of us." He looked at me differently then, as if seeing the outline of someone he hadn't expected. He nodded once, stiffly, and left without another word. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. In the days that followed, I adjusted small things. I changed passwords. I updated permissions at the bank. I removed Linda as an emergency contact and replaced her with my neighbor Ruth, who brought me soup once a month and never asked for anything back. I started taking longer walks in the morning, noticing how the light shifted on the sidewalk, how familiar houses looked different when you weren't rushing past them. I waved to people I'd lived near for years but never really seen. Linda stopped calling. Her social media went quiet. I didn't feel victorious. I felt grounded. One afternoon, while sorting through my mail, I found an old receipt tucked into a cookbook. It was from the jewelry store downtown, dated decades ago, Harold's careful signature at the bottom. I held it for a long time, then placed it with the others. Paper remembers. And so, finally, did I. On Monday morning, the phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, and my first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. I watched it buzz on the table beside my oatmeal, the screen lighting up my quiet kitchen like a small alarm. Something in me, old habit, maybe, or new courage, made me answer. "Mrs. Parker?" a woman asked. Her voice was professional but not cold. "This is Detective Alvarez with the Community Support Unit. We received a report from your bank." For a second, my throat tightened, not because I regretted anything, but because hearing the word detective made everything feel suddenly real, in a way paper never could. "Yes," I said. "I'm Evelyn Parker." She asked if we could meet. Not at a station, she explained, but at a small office inside the Community Services building downtown. "It's quieter," she said, "and more comfortable." Comfortable was not the word I would have chosen. but I appreciated the care in it. I agreed. I dressed like I was going to church, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I wanted to feel like myself. The sky was low and pale, the kind of morning where the world looks washed clean. The drive downtown took 15 minutes, and I spent most of it gripping the steering wheel and reminding myself that I wasn't the one who should feel ashamed. The building smelled like copier toner and hand sanitizer. The waiting area had faded pamphlets about housing assistance and food programs, and a fish tank in the corner with cloudy water. A receptionist with kind eyes handed me a clipboard. My name looked small on the sign-in sheet among so many others. Detective Alvarez met me at the door to a modest office with 2 chairs and a table. She was younger than Linda, which stirred something complicated in me. But her posture was steady, and she didn't talk down to me. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this," she said, then let the silence sit for a moment, as if she understood that sorry doesn't fix anything, but it can make space. I placed my folder on the table and opened it. The sound of paper sliding against paper was oddly soothing. I showed her the pawn shop documentation, the bank statements, the text message where Linda wrote, "It's temporary, I swear," and the screenshot of the vacation photo with the date. Detective Alvarez didn't react dramatically. She just took notes, eyes focused, asking calm questions. "Did your daughter have access to your home?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I gave her a key years ago." "And did you ever authorize her to take the jewelry or pawn it?" "No." "Did she tell you where she pawned it before you found out on your own?" "No." Those little words, yes, no, felt like stepping stones across water. Each one took me farther from the old fog I'd lived in, where everything was excused and blurred and smoothed over. Then she asked a question that made my stomach dip. "Mrs. Parker, have you checked your credit recently?" I stared at her. "My credit?" She nodded gently. "Sometimes when there's one kind of financial misuse, there are others. It doesn't mean it happened here, but we like to be thorough." I thought of Linda offering to help with paperwork after Harold died, the way she'd hovered when I logged into accounts, the time she'd insisted I let her handle my phone bill, because those plans are confusing. I'd been grateful then. I'd been tired and lonely and grateful. Detective Alvarez slid a printed form across the table and explained how to request a report. She also offered to connect me with an advocate who could help place protections on my accounts. Legal, standard, nothing dramatic. Just steps that people like me don't think we need until we do. Have you ever felt that sinking realization that someone knew where all your soft spots were and used them like handles? My hands were still as I signed the consent for information sharing. Not because I was fearless, but because something in me had finally snapped into place. I wasn't protecting Linda from consequences anymore. I was protecting myself from disappearing. When the meeting ended, Detective Alvarez walked me to the lobby. She didn't promise a specific outcome. She didn't offer false comfort. She simply said, "You did the right thing by documenting it. Whatever happens next, you're not alone in it." Outside, the air had warmed. A bus sighed at the curb, doors wheezing open. People moved around me with coffee cups and backpacks, living their ordinary lives. I sat in my car for a moment before turning the key, looking at my hands on the steering wheel. These hands had folded laundry, kneaded dough, held babies, signed hospital forms, and now signed papers that said, I mattered. When I got home, there was a package on my porch. No return address, just my name in blocky handwriting. Inside was a framed photo of my grandchildren at the beach, their faces sun-flushed, smiles wide. Tucked behind the frame was a note from Linda written in the same stiff tone as her letter. "Thought you'd want this. The kids miss you. Please stop making this harder than it has to be. I sat at the kitchen table and read it twice. Then I turned the frame over and found sand stuck in the cardboard backing, grains trapped in the seam, like proof of where they'd been. Linda had sent me a souvenir and a warning in the same breath. I didn't cry. I didn't throw it away either. I placed the frame on the shelf, facing the wall for now, not out of spite, but because I wasn't going to be pulled by guilt like a leash. That evening, Ruth knocked on my back door with a loaf of banana bread wrapped in foil. She didn't ask questions right away. She just set it on the counter and said, "You look like you've been carrying a lot." I nodded, and the nod was enough. Later, after she left, I logged into the credit bureau website with my reading glasses sliding down my nose. I requested the report, my heart steady and heavy. The screen loaded slowly, line by line, like a curtain rising. And when I saw Linda's name, right there, attached to an old store card I didn't remember opening, I felt something cold move through me. Not surprise, confirmation. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, then leaned back in my chair and let my eyes close. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock and the low whir of the ceiling fan. In the old days, I would have blamed myself immediately. I would have wondered what I missed, what I did wrong, how I could have been so foolish. But that night, something different happened. I opened my eyes and read it again. Slower this time, like a judge reading a verdict. The store card was listed as opened 2 years ago. The balance wasn't huge, but it wasn't nothing either. There were late payments, a couple of fees, and a note that made my stomach tighten. Account owner contacted regarding delinquency. I had never received those calls. Or maybe I had, and I dismissed them as scams, the way older people are warned to do. I printed the credit report and held the warm page in my hands like a piece of weathered truth. The paper smelled faintly of ink and toner. Real, solid, impossible to explain away. I called Mr. Collins the next morning and asked for an earlier appointment. He didn't sound surprised. "Bring everything," he said. At his office, I laid the credit report on the desk with my other documents. It looked like it belonged there, another link in a chain I had refused to see for too long. Mr. Collins adjusted his glasses and studied it carefully. "This is identity misuse," he said, not raising his voice, not dramatizing it, just naming it. I gripped my purse strap with both hands. "So what do I do?" He talked about disputes, official letters, a fraud alert, a credit freeze. He explained that the goal wasn't revenge, it was repair and protection. He reminded me gently that the law doesn't care about family titles when the facts are clear. When I left his office, my head felt full, but not messy. Focused, like a room after you open all the windows. On the drive home, I passed the elementary school where Linda used to perform in holiday plays. I remembered sitting in the auditorium with a paper cup of cocoa, applauding until my palms stung. I remembered her face on stage, bright and hungry for attention. Back then, I thought that hunger meant she would become brave. Now I understood it differently. Hunger doesn't always turn into courage. Sometimes it turns into entitlement. At home, I made a list in my notebook of every account I could think of. Bank, insurance, utilities, phone, pharmacy. I spent hours on hold, listening to tinny music and recorded voices telling me my call was important. I verified information, updated security questions, requested mailed confirmations. I made notes of every representative's name and the time I spoke to them. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't cinematic in the way movies show revenge. It was the slow, stubborn work of taking my life back. In the late afternoon, Linda came to my house without warning. I saw her through the front window, standing on the porch with her arms folded tight, her mouth set in a line. She looked older than she did on social media, tired, defensive, real. I didn't open the door right away. I stood in the hallway and listened to her knock, 3 sharp raps that sounded like impatience, not apology. When I did open it, I didn't invite her in. Her eyes flicked past me, searching for the familiar warmth, the automatic welcome. It wasn't there. "What is this?" she demanded, holding up her phone as if it were evidence. "Mark says you're freezing accounts and calling lawyers and now there's something about my name being investigated." I kept my voice even. "I found a credit account opened in my name." Her expression shifted too quickly. Surprise flashed, then something like calculation. "That's not what you think," she said immediately. I nodded once. "Then explain it." She huffed. "It was just a store card. I needed it at the time, and it didn't hurt you." I felt something tighten behind my ribs. Not rage, a kind of grief that had finally found its shape. "It did hurt me," I said. "It damaged my credit. It put me at risk, and you did it without telling me." She rolled her eyes. "You weren't using your credit for anything anyway." There it was again, her belief that if I wasn't actively spending, I wasn't actively living. I looked at her face and tried to find the little girl who used to crawl into my lap with scraped knees and whisper that she was sorry even when she wasn't sure what sorry meant yet. I couldn't find her. "You made choices," I said quietly. "Now I'm making mine." Linda's voice rose. "So, you're really going to do this? You're going to ruin me over a stupid card and some jewelry you don't even wear?" I kept my gaze steady. "You ruined your own peace when you decided my life was yours to use." Her cheeks flushed, and she stepped closer, lowering her voice as if the neighbors might hear and judge her. "Mom, you're being vindictive." The word hung between us like a slap. I didn't answer right away. I thought about all the times I had swallowed hurt to keep her comfortable. I thought about the banana bread Ruth brought, the way quiet kindness feels when it's not asking for anything in return. I thought about Harold's steady hands and how he would have stood beside me right now if he could. "I'm being careful," I said at last. "There's a difference." Linda stared at me, her eyes glossy. For a moment, I thought she might cry. Instead, she hardened. "If you keep pushing this," she said, voice trembling with anger, "don't expect us to come around. Don't expect to see the kids like you used to." That threat landed exactly where she intended. My chest tightened, and for a second my vision went soft at the edges. Then I remembered the framed photo facing the wall on my shelf. I remembered the sand trapped behind it, like a tiny hostage note. I lifted my chin. "I love my grandchildren," I said, "but I won't buy access to them with my silence." Linda's mouth opened, then closed. She looked stunned, as if she couldn't believe I'd spoken that sentence out loud. "You're changing," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "I am." She turned and walked down my steps, her sandals slapping against the wood. She didn't look back. I closed the door gently. My hands shook after, and I let them. I sat at the kitchen table and placed my palm flat on the printed credit report, feeling its warmth fade. Outside, the evening settled in, soft and ordinary. The world didn't crack open. No thunder rolled. But inside me, something finally did. I stopped hoping she would become the daughter I needed, and I started becoming the woman I did. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful exactly, but steady like a river after a storm has passed. The phone stopped ringing so often. Linda didn't come by again. Mark sent one last message that said only, "We need space," as if space were something they had just invented. I let them have it. Every Tuesday morning, I drove downtown to a small office with frosted windows where an advocate named Marjorie helped me untangle what had been quietly knotted for years. She spoke slowly, never rushing me, explaining each form before I signed it. Fraud affidavits, dispute letters, credit freezes. Each document felt like another brick placed carefully back into my own foundation. I learned that my name had been used twice more than I realized. A phone upgrade at a carrier store, a short-term payment plan for furniture I'd never seen. None of it catastrophic, but together it painted a picture that was impossible to deny. Linda hadn't stumbled once. She had walked a path. Marjorie never used the word betrayal. She didn't have to. She talked instead about patterns, about how trust can be worn down the way a river wears stone, not with force, but with persistence. I nodded more than I spoke. I had lived that lesson without knowing its name. At home, I began changing my routines. I bought a small safe and bolted it inside the closet, the kind that looks unremarkable unless you know what you're looking for. I shredded old documents I no longer needed and scanned the ones I did, saving them to a flash drive and a cloud account with a password Linda would never guess. Not because she wasn't smart, but because she didn't know me as well as she thought she did. I also did something unexpected. I started telling the truth out loud. When Ruth asked how I was doing, I didn't say fine automatically. I told her I was tired but stronger. When my cousin Elaine called from Ohio and gently hinted that family is family, I said calmly, family doesn't get to hurt you without consequence. There was a pause on the line, then a quiet, I understand, that felt like a small blessing. One afternoon, I went to the police records office to sign a final statement confirming the documentation I'd already submitted. The officer on duty was polite, efficient, and younger than my grandchildren would be one day. He didn't treat me like a fragile thing. He treated me like a citizen. "Everything lines up," he said, tapping the file. "You did a good job keeping records." "Thank you," I replied, and meant it. Praise hits differently when you've earned it late in life. That night, alone in my living room, I took the jewelry out of the drawer again. I laid each piece on the coffee table and looked at them under the warm lamplight. They felt heavier than before, not in weight, but in meaning. These weren't just objects recovered. They were boundaries reclaimed. I fastened the pearl necklace around my neck and caught my reflection in the darkened window. The woman looking back at me had more lines than the last time she wore them, more silver in her hair. But her eyes were clearer, quieter, as if they finally trusted her. I wore the pearls to the grocery store the next morning. No one noticed, of course. Or maybe they did, and it didn't matter. I walked the aisles slowly, comparing prices, choosing apples with care. At the checkout, the young cashier complimented my necklace without knowing why it made my throat tighten. "Thank you," I said, smiling. "It's old." "So is the best stuff," she replied casually, already moving on. At home, I started filling my days with small, deliberate choices. I joined a morning stretching class at the community center, full of women who laughed easily and complained about their knees. I signed up for a basic computer safety workshop and sat in the front row, asking questions without apology. Knowledge, I learned, has no expiration date. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Linda's attorney. It was measured, careful, proposing repayment terms and asking if I would consider resolving the matter without further action. I read it slowly, twice, then set it aside. I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired. That evening, I walked through my neighborhood just as the sun began to set, the sky soft with pink and gold. Children rode bikes in uneven circles. Someone was grilling, the smell of smoke and onions drifting through the air. Life continued, generous and indifferent. I realized then that revenge, the kind people imagine, had never really interested me. I didn't want to see Linda punished for the sake of pain. I wanted my life back, intact and protected. I wanted to wake up without bracing myself. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table and drafted a response with Mr. Collins' guidance. The terms were clear: restitution, written acknowledgement, no further access to my accounts or property, communication only through attorneys for now. It was firm, legal, and unemotional. When I signed my name, my hand didn't shake. Later, as I prepared for bed, I paused by the shelf where the framed photo of my grandchildren still faced the wall. I turned it around and studied their faces again. I kissed my fingers and touched the glass, a quiet promise made without witnesses. I would always love them. But love, I finally understood, doesn't mean surrendering yourself piece by piece. That night, I slept with the window open, listening to crickets and distant traffic, feeling the steady comfort of a life that was, once again, undeniably my own. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning, early enough that the courthouse hallways still smelled faintly of cleaning solution and stale coffee. I arrived 10 minutes early, as I always do, and sat on a hard wooden bench with my purse folded neatly on my lap. Around me, people whispered, argued softly, stared at their phones. Everyone looked like they were waiting for something they didn't want. Mr. Collins met me there, calm and prepared, his briefcase worn at the edges. He greeted me with a nod, not sympathy, not encouragement, just respect. That mattered more than I expected. Linda arrived with her attorney a few minutes later. I recognized the tension in her shoulders before I saw her face. She didn't look at me at first. When she did, her expression flickered, as if she couldn't decide whether to be angry or ashamed. Mark wasn't with her. I noticed that immediately. We were led into a small conference room with a long table, a pitcher of water, and fluorescent lights that showed everything too clearly. The mediator, a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair, explained the process in a steady voice. No raised voices, no interruptions, facts over feelings. I listened as Linda's attorney spoke about stress, poor judgment, intent to repay. Words stacked carefully to build a softer version of events. When it was my turn, I spoke plainly. I described what was taken, how I found out, the documents I gathered, the impact on my finances and my sense of safety. I didn't embellish. I didn't apologize. Linda stared at the table. When the mediator asked her if she agreed with the facts as presented, she hesitated. That pause told the whole story. Eventually, she nodded. The agreement took shape slowly. Restitution in installments, credit accounts formally transferred and closed, written acknowledgement of unauthorized use, a no-contact clause regarding my finances and property. Everything legal, everything enforceable. As the papers were printed, Linda finally looked up at me. Her eyes were red, but her voice was flat. "I never thought you'd take it this far," she said. I met her gaze without anger. "I never thought I'd need to." She looked away again. When it was over, I signed my name one last time and felt a quiet finality settle over me. Not relief. Closure is rarely dramatic. It feels more like setting something heavy down and realizing your arms are free. Outside, the sky was clear and sharp blue. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, letting the sun warm my face. Mr. Collins shook my hand and told me I'd handled myself well. Then he left, already moving on to his next obligation. I drove home alone. The house welcomed me with its familiar sounds, the refrigerator clicking on, the floorboard that always creaked near the hallway. I set my keys in their place and took off my coat. Everything was exactly where it should be. That afternoon, I went through my calendar and canceled a few things I'd only kept out of habit, obligations that no longer fit. I replaced them with a note to myself: lunch with Ruth, Tuesday walk, library talk on local history. Small plans, mine. A week later, the first restitution payment arrived by certified mail. I deposited it without ceremony and filed the receipt. I didn't feel satisfaction watching the numbers change on my bank screen. I felt steadiness. Linda didn't call. She didn't text. The silence was different now. Not tense, not manipulative, just space. One evening, I took the jewelry out again, not to check on it, but to decide. I chose the sapphire earrings and placed them in a small box by the door. The next morning, I wore them to breakfast at a cafe I'd always passed but never entered. I sat by the window, ordered eggs and toast, and watched the street wake up. No one there knew my story. That was part of the freedom. When I returned home, I rearranged the living room slightly, moving a chair closer to the window, letting more light in. I framed a new photo of myself from a community center event, laughing mid-sentence, alive in a way I hadn't been for a while. That night, as I turned off the lights, I realized something quietly profound. The chapter with my daughter wasn't healed, but it was contained, and for the first time in years, my future felt like something I was allowed to protect. I wake earlier these days, not because of worry, but because my body seems to know I have time again. The mornings belong to me. I make my coffee slowly, standing by the kitchen window as light moves across the counter inch by inch. Some days I wear the pearls. Some days I don't. The choice itself feels like a small luxury. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after the mediation. That isn't how it works. There are still quiet moments when grief sneaks up on me, when I think of Harold and wish I could tell him how all of this turned out. I imagine him listening, nodding, that familiar half-smile on his face. I think he would be proud, not because I fought back, but because I finally stood still. Linda and I don't speak now, not in the way people mean when they say that sentence with drama attached. There are no angry messages, no public scenes, just distance, clean and sad and necessary. I hear about the grandchildren through Ruth sometimes, through mutual acquaintances, through the soft echo of a life that continues without my daily presence in it. That loss still aches. I won't pretend otherwise, but the ache no longer owns me. I've filled my weeks with gentle things, library talks where no one knows my history, walks where the same man nods at me every morning and never asks questions, lunches where laughter comes easily because it isn't loaded with obligation. I've learned how peaceful it feels to be valued simply for showing up, not for what I provide. My finances are steady, my credit is clean again. My documents are organized, protected, quiet in their folders. There is comfort in that order. But more than that, there is dignity. One afternoon, while sitting on my porch with a book open on my lap, a young woman walking by stopped and smiled at me. She said I reminded her of her grandmother. Strong, she said. The word surprised me. I didn't feel strong in the way movies make it look. I felt aligned, as if my inside and outside finally agreed. Have you ever noticed how peace doesn't announce itself? It arrives softly, like a cat finding a warm place to settle. I still love my daughter. That never stopped. Love doesn't vanish just because boundaries appear. But I've learned something important at this age, something I wish I'd understood sooner. Love without self-respect slowly erases you, and no one notices you're gone until you stop giving. In the evenings, I sometimes take the framed photo of my grandchildren down and sit with it. I talk to them quietly, not asking for anything, just sending love the way you send light through a window. I trust that someday, in some way, they'll understand. As for me, I am here, fully, present in my own life. I am not bitter, I am not broken. I am not invisible anymore. I am an older woman who learned, a little late but not too late, that protecting yourself is not cruelty. It is wisdom. Thank you for sitting with my story, for listening all the way to the end. If it meant something to you, I'm grateful. If stories like this matter to you, a simple like or subscription helps more than you know. And I'll leave you with this question, one I had to answer for myself. If you were in my place, what would you have done?